how do you reconcile this kind of disappointment in the fact that various movements for moral reform kind of haven't transformed society as much as they might have, or as much as they have in the past, with the fact that you as a conservative often oppose the transformation of society in accordance.
Yeah, well, this is the interesting tension in the book, right? It's I am some kind of political conservative, but it's a book that's partially nostalgic for the greater dynamism of an era when liberal social movements were transforming the country. And I don't have a perfect resolution to that tension. I mean, I think one thing that I think is that certain aspects of baby boomer era liberalism were too successful in their in the extent to which they overthrew past establishments, and the baby boomers had trouble figuring out what to build in their place. And you lost this sort of fruitful tension between reform and tradition. You sort of pushed tradition away, and then you were left to sort of float uncertainly in the new world that you built. So that's sort of a conservative perspective. But then, I think that, first of all, there are a couple crusades for moral reform that right now are considered right-wing crusades, but that are crusades, right? So, we've obviously had our own podcast disagreements about abortion, but I think it's fair to say that, the pro-life movement, even if you think it's wrong, is in certain ways a sort of utopian movement in a sense, right? It's a movement with a particular moral vision that it wants to promote for society. And the pro-life movement has, I think, in certain ways failed to gain the kind of traction that most pro-lifers would like to see. And I think you could cite other examples. I think there are moral reform movements that, that sort of blur partisan boundaries. I think that the alliance, the temporary alliance between feminists and social conservatives around pornography in the 1980s was a cause of moral reform that has sort of floated up occasionally in our society, but mostly we've just become sort of more sort of addicted to internet pornography, and that crusade has gone away. And then there are crusades on the left that I don't always agree with their sort of strategic vision, but I think, I think that there are virtues in them. I was, as you know, somewhat sympathetic to elements of Bernie Sanders' campaign. I think I'm not a socialist, but I think certain socialist critiques of how wealth is distributed in our society have a lot of power. So I'm not averse to all moral reform movements. And then there are also case studies like the environmental movement, right, where there's a version of a sort of climate change anxiety that you could imagine feeding into something like the Apollo program or the Manhattan Project or something, some sort of sweeping program of technological innovation that sort of tackles climate change directly, and sees it as a challenge to be overcome and sort of an opportunity for greater progress. And I think environmentalism—
Well, isn't that the Green New Deal?
Well, but I think there are elements of the Green New Deal that are way better than the kind of environmentalism that, say, Greta Thunberg represents, where the idea is basically that if we all just start eating more oatmeal and having fewer kids, we can— I'm caricaturing here, obviously, but I think there is that sort of degrowth side of environmentalism that seems more like decadence. And I think this is a failure in part on the right? I think that sort of free market conservatives should look at something like the Green New Deal and say, well, we can find some things to like there, and we can create partnerships to sort of, invest and innovate our way out of the challenge. So I think decadence certainly applies to where the right has ended up and not just to where the left has ended up. But I think generally there's a sense of, a sense that our challenges are sort of beyond our capacities to handle, and the best that we can hope for is to sort of maintain stability and hope that they don't get too bad.